Hello there, Theo here, and we're having a video about some changes that we've observed in Minecraft 1.13 and 1.14. Some of these are bugs, some of these are changes that were intentional that a lot of people don't like. And so we're going to go through a totally not exhaustive, but fairly significant list of these changes to the game since Minecraft 1.12 that a lot of you, I think, will be interested in that will affect your gameplay or maybe not, depending on what your interests are.
Hello, I'm Ray, and I'm concerned about these bugs because a lot of these changes not only affect massive servers, but they also affect single player worlds. And a lot of people that play Minecraft do play single player, and they definitely will notice these changes.
Hi there, I'm Theo Sib. I run a Discord called Eigencraft that has a lot of people from different communities, modders, technical players, non-technical players. We have bug tracker moderators, and we even have Minecraft developers in there. And we have a focus on helping the developers fixing bugs, but also, we try to influence them sometimes when we feel that there are feature changes that are making things, breaking things that a lot of people have spent a lot of time working on. And they really do a pretty decent job of listening to us and understanding, what kinds of automation and what kind of cool builds and other things that people like to do in the game. The help of people in Eigencraft, we have fixed a number of bugs in the game already, and that have gotten into releases, and we've got a list of bugs that have been accumulated, as I mentioned previously, that we're going to go over.
Yeah, I'm Kaylee, and I'm an engineer in real life, but as a survival player, I've focused on understanding village mechanics, and so with the changes in 1.14, I have been pretty interested in how that changes or breaks villages, especially on servers, and with all the lag that villagers and their point of interest creates, and whether that will play nicely with servers.
Now, with the villager and pillager update, there is some changes to villagers, and some of them are negative. So let's talk about those.
Yeah, so if you have a 1.13 world and you put in hundreds of hours developing all of your book trades so that you've got all 32 of the important book trades, or your server upgrades to 1.14 and suddenly you have a bunch of nitwits that no longer have any trades.
So all past villagers will essentially be verted back to villagers that have no trades at all. So they're like the default ones that you can't even click on them. They're like this. So if you had villagers that had really, really good trades and you spent hours and hours getting those perfect villagers, and then you upgraded 1.14, you just lost all that progress. And yeah, when they do get their profession, they're just going to have new trades. Everything's being completely different. Now this is different than it was like when they changed it from 1.7 to 1.8, because they did do a villager change between those two versions. So 1.7 to 1.8, they kind of changed up the trades. Not as big as the change that they did here in the villager and pillager update. What they did is they just threw the trades on in the front. So what they should have done, instead of going ahead and erasing all the trades, they should have threw all the old trades here and then just put the new trades just underneath of them. And yeah, like on the ProtoTech server, we have our 1.7 villager who has maybe about 20 some trades. And we updated to 1.8 when we got the new trades. And they just stacked the new trades at the end of them. So now we have like maybe 30 some trades, or maybe it's close to 40 trades on that villager. And then what happens, of course, you go 1.14, you lose all that. And that's really disappointing to especially servers that are well developed and have tons and tons of great villagers with great trades. You wouldn't want to lose all that progress that they made. So another change that they made is the professions that come with the villagers don't come with the generation of the village. The way it used to work in the past is the church would always have a guy that was inside that was a priest, and he would just generate with that structure. And now what they do is they generate all the villagers as the default ones, and then they just put the workstations inside, hoping that they would get that profession. The problem is there's a lot of houses that don't have any workstations in them, but they do have villagers in them. Therefore, you come out with a lot of villagers that end up not having any professions.
Unfortunate effects of the way they have chosen so far to implement these villagers is they need to be able to find certain points of interest. For example, their workstations, and this seems to be very CPU intensive, and so you end up with practical limits on the number of villagers that you can have simply because your server CPU will hit 100% when you've got, not even a couple hundred villagers. So combine that with the fact that people are going to want to have more villagers because the trades won't refresh for 20 minutes. And this becomes a significant limitation. On top of that, people want to use villagers for iron farms, and you need hundreds of them for that. And this basically makes the server unplayably slow. So this is something that they're aware of. The developers are aware of the performance problems with villagers, and they have test worlds that they can, that demonstrate the problem, but they haven't really fixed the problem for the release, which I guess for, starter worlds is not really a problem. If we look at the CPU load on this one, it's probably not bad at all. Yeah, we're running at around 40% CPU on the server, which is not awesome, but it's okay. But if we had 200 of them for an iron farm, it'd be crushed under the load.
So also it's nighttime and they should be sleeping, and they keep coming out of the houses, coming out of bed, wandering around. And I think it's not just because they didn't have enough beds because we spawned some in, but they're not staying in bed, and they don't close the doors when they go in the house, so that leaves them unprotected. Yeah, some of them will go to bed, and others just don't seem to be doing that.
And one of the things that I notice when working with iron farms is that when the villagers do produce a iron golem, it will lag the server down for a short while. And a couple of guys suggested that what was occurring is when the iron golem is spawned in, it changes a whole bunch of NPT tags of all the villagers, and it changes like 20 different tags over all the different villagers, and that is pretty significant, and it causes the server actually to lag down every time it summons in one iron golem. There's another problem with villagers, and that's when these villagers obtain a lot of information with their villager, and what happens when they go through any type of portal, like another portal, they actually lose their information which they obtain. So they might remember like what's going on with the village and if they need to summon in an iron golem, and then all this is lost just by them going through another portal, which actually affects the ability to make decent iron farms. So a lot of people ask if the farmer villagers still go ahead and will do the automatic crop uprooting as well as replanting. They do this. It just becomes extremely slow and inefficient at this point. So they spend a lot of time at their workstation, which is this composter here.
Yeah, when they go back to the workstation every day, they might jump on the composter, and then when they jump off, a lot of times they'll break their own farmland, which is why, yeah, you just saw them do it, which is why there's grass there instead of crops. And since the farmers can't plow the land again, it becomes permanently unavailable for them to plant.
And you can see how the farmers are kind of really slow at harvesting. We got some crops over here that should be harvested. And these guys are meandering around and they're not really harvesting anything. And you can break stuff and you would think they'd come over here and try to fix it or try to replant it, but they're really not too concerned about it. So the reason why it's partly slow is because they spend so much time at their workstation, which I don't know what they're actually doing here because their work should actually be here in the field. And then they spend so much time at their meeting spot, and then they spend so much time in their bed or trying to get to their bed. And between all that, they don't really spend much time actually doing much with the crops. So they're not actually much of a farmer, they're more of just a watering guy. Now, Kaylee and I did find a way to update our villagers to 1.14 without them losing their trades, but it's not easy to do, especially on a large scale, but I'll do a separate video explaining how. So it's important that they fix it, otherwise what will happen, you just end up with guys like this, which are the default villagers.
Yeah, it's really easy. Fly out to the edge of the world and then you have to wait and the game lags while you're waiting for the chunks to load.
And like some places, it seems that the chunks never even properly show up. Doesn't matter how much time you spend there. You have to do stuff like relog or completely restart your client or do like F3 plus T.
Yeah, and I noticed it in older versions of Minecraft as well, but it seems significantly worse. And chunks that have rendered, you turn around, they're gone, and you have to wait for them to re-render.
A lot of people ask if this is actual chunks that are unloading. This is not. This is just rendering. So this is just kind of visuals. It's not actually affecting the chunk loading. But there is problems with chunk loading. This is not the same thing. I think it might have to do with the chunks, the way they load them. They don't seem like they always have priority on rendering the chunks nearest to the player. Yeah, so you can kind of like X-ray see all this around us because this chunk isn't rendering properly. And sometimes like everything just vanishes depending on how you look. Stuff just doesn't render.
I think what I had noticed in 1.13 would be your client initially loading the chunk. It might take a little while, but once it had loaded, it was cached, and it doesn't seem to be that way in 1.14.
It's not just chunks that are newly generated. It also applies to anytime you're moving into any chunks, even ones that have been loaded before. There is a long-term bug to do with witch huts, and the way what is happening is when the witch hut kind of ends up on a hill or something, sometimes what will happen is the actual spot where the hut is isn't the same spot where the game thinks the hut should be. So the bounding box where you can make like a witch farm might actually be lower down if the witch hut is on a hill, because the game will try to generate the hut on the highest block instead of actually putting it where the bounding box is. This can cause problems because people will come and they'll try to make a witch farm, and it turns out no witches will spawn in it because the bounding box is actually a different spot. This seems like a really easy bug that they could fix, either by not making the witch hut move up or down, or just making the bounding box move with the witch hut. So currently there's a problem with the dragon. His AI is broken, so he'll never actually come down to the portal and do his little thing where he would try to attack the player while staying on top of the portal. And now the dragon, what he'll do is he just flies around up above and will shoot down at the player. And essentially what's happening is his different phases that he's supposed to go through is kind of glitched out. Now this is one of those bugs where they'll eventually fix it, but it's really kind of weird that they would come out with a full release of 1.14 when you can't even do a proper boss fight. And the Ender Dragon is seen as kind of the end game boss fight. So yeah, there is some inconsistency with this observer setup here. Essentially we got two blocks in front, and then if we would power this, they're synchronized. So with the observer in the front, it's different.
You have to do the observer on the front, you have it.
Oh yeah, right there, you see it happen. And changes like this to observers may seem small, but if you have one of these in your contraption and also your contraption stops working, it would be pretty difficult to try to figure out what exactly went wrong, as it's such a small thing, but creates such a different outcome. And the question always goes back to, like, what did they change to make this actually work different now? So there's been a change in the game where mob spawning is slower, and this is because when the game is determining where to place the mobs, it now determines it from the bottom of the world all the way up to the tallest block. It used to just determine the tallest block that could spawn mobs, so this block here would be the tallest, and it wouldn't bother checking any blocks higher. But now, even if you have like glass blocks, which mobs don't normally spawn on, the game will still see these guys as blocks that are up in the air, and because they're going higher, the game will continue to search higher to randomly try to place mobs. And the game will also try to check the mob cap for every new chunk. So if there is a chunk here and it puts some mobs in here, then moves into the next chunk, puts some more mobs, and it continues doing this. And every time it goes into a new chunk and decides to put down some new mobs, it also checks to see if we have reached the mob cap. This puts a lot of strain on the server, as it's doing a lot more checking to see if the cap has been reached, rather than going through all the chunks, placing the mobs, and then checking at the very end before spawning in another round of mobs. And in the past, the game used to kind of check stuff per sub-chunk, being this blue line here. If the blocks were below that, they would just try to spawn them up to the highest block that is underneath of the blue line. But now it's also per block, so it doesn't matter if you put a block here, here, or here, they're just going to slowly increment it rather than jumping sub-chunk by sub-chunk, as there is 16 sub-chunks in the world, so it makes some really big steps when it did jump, rather than block by block, which is 256.
Now you put a glass block and the height map doesn't care what kind of block it is. Most people say you should multi-thread Minecraft, and they don't know what they're talking about. But this is one of those ones where I agree with the decision to do lighting in its own thread. And now we don't have the massive lag caused by lighting updates. I mean, yeah, maybe it would have been possible to optimize the lighting, spread it out over time. There's all kinds of things that could have been done. The drawback is that we can't rely on light map anymore for things like mob spawning. What they've done is they just piggybacked on that existing mechanism to decide how to generate random numbers for deciding where to spawn things.
Like if there was a block in it, then it's going to save it, you're saying?
Yeah, right, exactly. And it's going to count that. So the reason that this affects anything is that the game doesn't to check all the spawnable surfaces would be computationally too expensive. So it just generates random coordinates and then checks to see if those coordinates are spawnable. They might be in the middle of blocks, they might be in the middle of the air. And so they're going to go from 0 to some maximum. And that maximum used to be from the lighting calculations, and now it's just the highest block coordinate.
So if you're AFKing above your farm, trying to prevent mobs from spawning in caves and just want them to spawn in like your mob farm, which is in the air, you can AFK above it by having a single stack, and that single stack that you just built will affect the spawns in that area, but they won't affect the area around it, except for pack spawning. So what you could do, you could always stack in the center of your farm straight up, or you can just go just outside of your farm and then stack up, and that way you're up high, but you're still able to not affect the pack spawning of your farm down below. Now something like witch huts, which no longer have pack spawning, you can actually put your AFK spot just beside it. And that way you're essentially right above it, and you can make a minimal perimeter, and you can still have it so that you get great rates. So yeah, there is that bug that you told me about, and I also noticed it too. When you switch your command to like repeat and always active, you'd think it would always be going off all the time. But I don't know if it has to do with unloading or not, but the command will just stop working. Even if you set to like redstone and power it, it's still once in a while it'll just stop working. For anybody who uses commands, this gets pretty old when you have like tons of commands and you can't figure out which ones just abruptly just started not working, like for what reason. So yeah, one of the changes, I don't know why they change it, but armor stands actually no longer go up when they come up to like a little incline. So they used to be able to go like down this little incline and then back up again. You'll see him go down, but now they just get stuck and they never go back up again. Yeah, and they should definitely fix that. It seems like a pretty easy fix. So this fly machine does work, but he has another fly machine that doesn't work anymore in 1.14. And let's go ahead and try that one out.
So we can say that.
Yeah, this one doesn't work. Something changed with observers, and it's not quite sure, but there's a bug report on it, the way they update, making this one no longer work. That fly machine definitely worked. And this is another one of those observer bugs, which is a bit hard to pinpoint exactly what changed, but you definitely tell something changed when your device doesn't work. Now there's still issue with pistons not letting light going through them all the time, and this just causes tons of light updates. So if we go down underground and look upwards, you can see over here in the F3 screen, it shows the client light as well as the server light. And there's actually a lot of useful information over here, and something I don't think I've talked about before, but this line here as well as this line, this tells you what is the highest block that is above you. And this one's for client side, and this is for server side. And they also have one for sound as well, so you can see all the different sound that's activating around you. So let's go ahead and open up the piston, and we'll see how the light changes. So when I power it, and you see when I retract it, how it lets light through for a little bit. That's problematic, but it even gets worse when the piston is sideways, because right now it won't let any light through in that state, but if we power it, then it lets light through. So every time a piston opens and closes like this, it just ends up having to cause more updates. Now they did improve that lighting engine a lot, so it actually doesn't make as big a difference as it used to, but it would be nice if pistons were consistently transparent, and this would avoid other problems as well. So yeah, the soul sand lost its property to put stuff on top of it. So essentially what it was is if it was a full square and it was at the full meter height, it was able to put stuff on top of it. And soul sand, like visually, is a full meter high, but the actual collision with it, which is what the player collides with, is less than 1 meter. So you can see I'm actually a little bit down in the ground if I pull up bounding boxes compared to a solid block, which I'm staying on top of. And that has always been the case where mobs could spawn on top of this. You could always put like rails on top of it and like levers on top of it, but they lost all these properties. And one of the other properties that it had is that like mobs would suffocate in it. So you can see now they don't suffocate inside of it. And yeah, so pretty much it's kind of acting like a whole different block. You might even consider it very similar to other blocks, such as like enchanting tables.
Okay, now let's talk about chunk loading. Up to version 112, it was possible to cause the game to maintain up to pretty much any number of chunks permanently loaded. People called it permaloading. And in 1.13, they changed the way that chunks are unloaded. So the main thing that they changed was that the order in which they would unload became essentially randomized. So we couldn't control chunk unloading anymore by making certain chunks get continually reloaded, and as a result, not allowing the game to unload other chunks that you wanted to keep loaded.
The question a lot of people are going to ask is there a way to do chunk loading without players in 1.14?
Well, by the way, the other thing that I should mention about chunk loading previously in older versions is that they would unload every 45 seconds, whereas now it's continuous. And that has affected things. So in 1.13, there was no viable way to permaload chunks. But in 1.14, what they've done is added a feature. If you'd throw items through a portal, it would load the other dimension for 15 seconds. And so now we have potentially a viable way to do some chunk loading, permaloading in 1.14. If like every 14.9 seconds, you had a portal on the nether side, have an object go through, and a portal from Overworld go through to the nether side, then they'll keep refreshing the cache entries for the portals on each side and from each dimension, and it's the cache entries that persist for 15 seconds that are what caused the other dimension to be loaded. And this was actually done to fix a problem. In 1.13, if you threw loads and loads of items through a portal, it wouldn't actually load the other dimension. And so as soon as you would go through the portal, and if you had thousands and thousands of items in the other dimension, you could freeze the game, and a server would quit because the tick would take more than 60 seconds. And now in 1.14 they fixed that. And so they've actually fixed two problems with one solution. One is to load the other dimension when you throw something through a portal, because now you have these 15 seconds of persistent loading. You can have player-free chunk loading on both sides of a nether portal.
So what about hopper chunk loading? That's have been completely removed in 1.14. It's no longer available, but it was also missing in 1.13 as well.
Well, it's worse than that. There are a lot of things that should load chunks. Redstone is one of them. Pistons, hoppers, and I can't think of other things off the top of my head.
So
but there
by
are other
that
things.
You mean if you had a redstone line that just goes off at a distance, and you flick a lever here, the redstone would not load chunks that are in if there is no player in there.
Yeah, so there used to be, you could make an instant wire that went thousands and thousands of chunks. Now you can't do that at all.
And then as a wire would cross the chunk border, if it was updated, it would continue updating the chunks that it went into and just keep making its way.
It would reach the end of the most distant loaded chunk and then just stop. So I saw in the code a mechanism for redstone and any block updates in general to load neighboring chunks, but they've disabled that somehow.
And this seems really strange. I definitely think this should be in the game. So how do you think they should implement this?
Well, more or less the way they did it before. So the way the mechanism works is normally chunks are loaded asynchronously. So they have this thing that the modders, because the modders have to make up the method and class names, that they're calling tickets. And so the player's position, for instance, will create a ticket to load a set of chunks, and then the chunk loader will then asynchronously bring all those into memory. Another thing that can create tickets is now portals. And that's how, so a portal cache entry is what loads the chunks around a portal in the dimension, something. And so there is a synchronous way to load a chunk where if the block update is going to cause if the code wants to get the block state of a chunk that isn't loaded, then it creates the ticket and just sits there and spin waits until that chunk comes in. And apparently they've disabled some of that, enough of it so that none of the things we'd expect to load chunks do at this time.
So how do you think they should solve the whole chunk loading issue in general? Do you think they should give us a unique redstone device that does load chunks? Or do you think they should bring back the old mechanics? Or do you think they should come up with new ones that are really streamlined and work really nice?
One of the ideas that I had a while back was for example, if there was some particular block that was pushed across chunk borders, it would load the other chunk. Well, in fact, that should be the case anyway. Pistons should be loading chunks if they push a block into the neighboring chunk, which is definitely broken. But the general idea that I had is that if you could build some kind of machine whose action would cause a chunk to be loaded for some period of time, then that would create some way to permaload chunks. So there's two issues here. One is just which chunks are loaded as a result of activity, like a redstone line being activated, okay, or hoppers or things like that. That's one issue. The other issue is loading chunks permanently, so that there isn't some neighboring chunk causing a chunk to load. That chunk is just loaded forever. You can walk away. Something might not be going in the chunk, and it's still loaded because you've got a machine there that you want to keep running and you don't want it to break or you don't want it to stop. Like you got an iron farm and you don't want the iron farm to unload. Okay, that's permaloading. And so there's two separate things here. We want to, on the one hand, we want things like redstone and hoppers to load neighboring chunks just because they're trying to access the neighboring chunk. And the other is that we need a mechanism to permanently load chunks regardless of what's going on in their boundaries. And so I think that the solution that they provided in 1.14, which causes a cache entry for a portal to be created and have that load chunks for 15 seconds, basically is in the spirit of what I had been suggesting previously.
And what do you think about the force loading command? A lot of times when I mention chunk loading, everybody talks about the command, which isn't available to survival, but it is nice for force loading chunks. So
He's
like
just an admin.
Vanilla server versus a semi-vanilla server.
Yeah.
In semi-vanilla servers, like you could get away with the force loading, but servers that stick with just strictly vanilla, then you're kind of left holding the sack, which is empty.
Right.
Do you feel like force load would be something they should make a permanent feature of vanilla survival players?
I think that this portal solution is a step in the right direction, and so we'll see how that goes.
And talking about like features, definitely if you guys, the viewers, have any cool ideas on how they could implement like a device that would keep a chunk loaded, definitely tell us down in the comments. Obviously, cool, unique ideas that kind of work into Minecraft are definitely always appreciated.
We talked about villager AI performance being a problem, but there are other performance problems that they fixed, like collision boxes. They did a nice job with that. Lighting was great.
Now, in general, there's a little bit of concern about the removing different types of game mechanics that are used quite often by end game players. And some of the reasoning behind fixing these is they say it's performance optimization, but oftentimes they don't fix the underlying problem. We kind of seen this in the 1.13 update, which compared to 1.12, it was extremely laggy. It wasn't performing very well. Now 1.14 is performing a little bit better, but still not doing as well as 1.12. And overall, you really notice the problems with like the chunk loading. And there are some mechanics that they removed that people really enjoyed, like the floating sand blocks and having the dragon eggs as a bedrock breaking method. Now both these methods could be seen as being bugs, and therefore it would make sense that they would remove them, but you still just made a hole in the game where there was something and now there's nothing. Now there's a lot of other issues that we notice when doing the streams and stuff. They aren't as major. We have problems with like command blocks not staying on. Some of the loot tables, the way that they are figured up has changed from the past. Glass and retracting pistons are seen as normal cubes, which causes some problems. Diving speed is affected by the nearby blocks. Armor stands don't auto step up anymore. Falling sand no longer deletes arrows, and there's a problem with chunk loading and the game setting the RNG not to a fixed value. And people still complain about like the flint and steel not being able to put fire on the side of blocks to update them. And they also removed the ender crystal bedrock breaking method. If you've seen my video where I cover different things that used to be in 1.12 but are no longer 1.13. And I do plan on making a video where I talk about stuff that works in 1.13 but no longer works in 1.14. So if you guys know of anything that should go into that video, please tell me down in the comments. Now, some people are still having CPU issues where the server is using up a large amount of CPU, which makes the game pretty much unbearable to run on servers. But they are said that they're going to come out with 1.14.1 either on Friday or Monday. So hopefully they fix a lot of these issues by then. Now, if you guys notice any issues in 1.14, please mention them down in the comments. And if you could, write bug reports on them if they're not already existing. Now, we went ahead and linked all the bug reports down in the description, and we would really appreciate it if you go ahead and upvote them. There's always tons of bugs to do with each version, but the main thing is that when they come out with a full release, they should remove the major bugs that really prevent servers from operating these type of communities without having special mods like Spigot. Now, this video was more of a talking episode, but it's really important that we brought up these points, as with 1.14 being a new version, there's a lot of people trying out this version, and they're not aware of some of these problems. Big thanks to Theosub as well as Kaylee for coming on and talking about these different issues, as well as the great technical communities who also help accumulate all these different bug reports, such as like the ProtoTech server, Eigencraft, technical Minecraft communities, as well as all the other servers. And especially you guys, the viewers, as a lot of times the issues are first seen by you guys that play the new snapshots in your very own worlds. So continue helping us point out different bugs in 1.14, and we'll continue to try to highlight them. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and share this video with everyone you know that plays 1.14 so that they're aware of these different types of bugs. And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and subscribe and give the video some love by showing it with a like. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye!